And right now we are moving forward to our panel discussion. So we will wrap up today, today's both sessions with a panel discussion with 4 students representatives from all 4 universities participating in this ISP. So please welcome. We will have it as Jason Yeager, who is a bachelor, who's studying bachelor degree in business administration at IE. Hi, Jason. We have Arno de Kepper, postgraduate in innovation entrepreneurship for engineers at KU Leuven. Caroline Pearsall, Master in Educational Technology at University College London, and Vivian Lai, Master in Educational Entrepreneurship at Oulu, University of Applied Sciences. And this panel will be moderated by Blair Stevenson, who is one of our funding partners, and who is also a principal lecturer and founder of the Master in Educational Entrepreneurship at Oulu. Welcome, everyone, and I'm giving the Zoom to you.
Thank you very much, Milena. And so thank you very much also for the invitation for being the facilitator today. For those of you who may not know me, my name is Blair, as Milena introduced. So I'm joining you from Oulu, Finland. I think there's a few familiar faces from some of the programs that I'm not involved with directly. But it's great to be asked to be part of this. For me as well, it's always fantastic to get a dialogue specifically from the student perspective. And also for those of you who don't know me, I'll try not to be the mean facilitator, but what I do like to do is really to have an active discussion. So feel free not only for the panelists, but also others to see this as an opportunity to engender a very interesting and deep and diverse discussion. So the way I'd like to run the session, I've been asked by Milena to look at a time frame that will roughly lead us, I think, until the I think just over or just under an hour, Milena, if we still have that time, but not that the panel has to take that much time specifically. So the idea of, for example, having some question and answers after that we can redirect to this group that's joining us today. But what I'd like to do is also send out some questions and direct those to the panelists, and then have that as a way to also go into some larger discussions. And so what I'd like to do to begin with is to go around to each of the 4 who are on the panel. And first off, I'm going to give one question, but when you first begin, if you can just share a little bit more about yourself when you first start talking. And the way I'd like to begin is just with some quick introductions. So I'm looking at who's closest to me on the screen here. So I think Caroline, I don't know if you're the one next to me, but on my screen you are. So Caroline, if you could just quickly introduce yourself.
Sure. Okay. So I'm Caroline. I live in France right now, but I'm English originally. I've worked as a musician for many years, playing Argentine tango music, and I've also worked as a teacher for at least 15 years as well now. And so I'm fascinated about educational technology because I think it has so much potential for the future, which is why I'm doing the master's and discovering the whole universe that is.
Great. Thank you. I see next down this side of me is Arno.
So hi, everyone. My name is Arno. I'm 23 years old. I live in Flanders in Belgium, and I graduated in industrial engineering with a specialization in biochemistry last year. And now this year I'm currently doing a postgraduate year, so an extra year, which is more about innovation and entrepreneurship, which also includes being part of the EETN network. And I'm just interested in it because just to know what kind of technology is out there and what exists or is in development and what could possibly be effectively implemented in university. So that's very interesting.
Great, thanks Arno. And then next I see down here, Vivian.
Hi, I'm Vivian. I'm from Hong Kong. So I'm based in Hong Kong. I work in education, was teaching before, and also doing a bit like program management, partnership, basically everything. But I'm particularly interested in how education and technology meets because I'm passionate about education and see how we can innovate education with or without tech. So that's hopefully I can develop something interesting in future that change education.
Great, thanks. And then I think over there, Jason.
Hi everyone, I'm Jason. I'm a third year student studying in Spain, but currently joining you from Belgium. I'm just super interested in EdTech because ever since I did this course at Stanford on EdTech technology, I just learned about how much EdTech can impact students, especially in the higher education institutions. So I've been working on a few projects and a startup in that area, and just excited to contribute my knowledge and have a good discussion.
Great, thank you. So also the way I like to run these kind of panels is if you're not on the panel, feel free to write in questions or comments, keep the dialogue going in the chat. I will try to leave some time at the end. I'll try not to take up too much of the time where I can go into the chat if you have a specific question for any of the panelists, that we'll try to go back to that and try to get a response to any question that is put there. Also, one other thing, I'm recognizing that this is a recording. So just also to lay the groundwork, I will ask some fairly specific questions about your experiences and for example, the program you're in. So just as a reminder to the panelists, if you're sharing stories or if you're sharing any kind of examples, just try to generalize it, and you don't necessarily have to name that instructor, you know, oh, that guy Blair, he was just awful the other day. So you can keep things fairly anonymous, but it would be great to just see how you can share some individual stories. For me, the idea of storytelling is always really powerful. So the way I'd like to begin, and I'll just kind of randomly end up choosing people, I'll just ask your name once somebody finishes talking. The first question I wanted to ask the panelists is, off the top of your head, can you share with the others something that you're already seeing that you're learning in your program? Something that comes to mind and think, yeah, this is something I'm already finding that I've learned by doing these studies. So we'll start, Arno, if you can start.
Do you mean like something I learned around educational technology, or?
Anything. So if somebody on the street came up to you and said, oh, you're in that program, so what are you learning in it? Anything, whatever comes to mind first.
Oh yeah, okay. So, what I'm learning currently, I think it's very interesting because it's very different this year in comparison to last year's. It's not about biochemistry anymore, because my previous years at university were a lot about biochemistry and taking up lots and lots of content from classes, which took very long, and you always had to listen to the professor. The professor was explaining and explaining hours and hours just by using PowerPoint in like 90% of all classes. And I felt like that the communication almost only happened in one way, so from teacher to student. And I think this year it's actually very different because I'm currently also following a course about cross-cultural experiences. So it's a course with people from Pennsylvania in the United States, from what I experience in there, although it is online, there is a lot of two-way communication, which I think is very good. So I think this year is more about your own opinion as well, instead of just listening and taking up everything.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Arno. So Vivian, anything to share, something specific that you've learned already?
I guess I think the biggest learning for me is about learning how to learn, because coming from Hong Kong, we've been influenced so much by the British education. So everything is set with the syllabus and with textbook, with everything to follow. But I guess the Finnish education system has offered a very different approach to learning, from students taking a lot of initiative. So I guess that has a lot of inspiration, because I'm coming from one extreme to the other extreme. But I think that's a good positive, inspiration. And then I think the other inspiration for me is coming from Hong Kong, which everything is like graded with a lot of assessment, examination. Whereas, with Finnish education, it's the exact opposite, because you're looking at how students are achieving the competency rather than, getting, 10 marks, 20 marks. So most of the time we're just getting a pass or fail. So it's not comparing yourself to anybody else. It's mostly about your own learning journey. So I guess this experience will change the way I look at education, and even change the way how I see that, and even put that in my work when I am auditing schools and companies on their learning program.
Okay, thank you, Vivian. Interesting. Carolyn.
So my first reaction to your question was, oh my gosh, how can I put all of that into one sentence? It's been a blast so far. That's the only way I can describe it. Yeah, I've been learning about designing educational technology. So all of the different factors you have to think about within that process. So I suppose one of the biggest things for me that is definitely going to change the way I function going forwards is about design thinking, which is something I'd never done before, coming from a kind of music-y English teacher background. I had never plunged into that before. I think also something that shocked me somewhat is this gap between educational EdTech developers and teachers and pedagogy. I had not expected that there would be such a big gap between the two. And also the need for things like learning statistics. I had not imagined I would need these kind of maths-based skills, which I suppose, of course, makes perfect sense, but that was a kind of a shock for me. But yeah, it's just been absolutely enormous. And of course, also thinking about morals and ethics. That was, again, something I'd vaguely heard a little bit about from newspaper articles before, but realizing the importance of getting that right now before it really develops and before everything gets fixed. And how essential that is that teachers are in on that dialogue, and that it's really kind of really a group and collaborative way forward rather than just EdTech companies leading the way. So yeah, that would be my summary.
Great, thank you, Carolyn. Jason, something that you've been learning?
I don't have much to add there. I definitely like all the points, especially what Caroline just said, and also what Vivian said about the learning to learn. I also think that's a really big one to stress, because especially as we look at things now, I think one of the biggest problems that we have to realize that learning is about making a behavior change at the end of the day, right? Because if you learn something, you know how to adapt your actions, your decisions, etc. And so I think we got to really think about how we can design an education system that is promoting this kind of change, this behavior change. And that's something that just kind of sparked an idea in me, and just something I was thinking about just sharing real quick.
Okay, thank you. The next question I wanted to go into a little bit, that may talk a little bit about the programs you're in, and wondering if you've had much chance to do peer learning. Because something I was personally very interested in your listing was the potential challenge about scripting online, the things we often do informally when we're physically somewhere, where I think Evelyn or somebody else was saying, when you go for coffee or when you have lunch, you have those times. And frankly, a lot of traditional education programs rely on those times outside of what is scripted by a teacher so that you can do peer learning. So I was wondering if you can share with us a little bit about, not only in your own program, but even just during the coronavirus situation. Can you tell a little bit about some of the peer learning you're doing specifically, and how it may connect with some of the things you've been sharing already that you've been learning, or something different? So peer learning, maybe we'll go backwards. So Jason.
Well, peer learning is definitely a big one. I think actually I'll bring this up. I think it's also really relevant. It's peer learning, but it's also a certain amount of socializing and being like, for your own mental health sake, with not only friends but with classmates. I've seen, which has been interesting, is just seeing like a lot of these platforms setting up this technology that enables you to effectively connect with like classmates and like conduct meetings, right? Because it seems easy, the fact that we can just pull up a Zoom meeting and connect with anyone, but in practice, in theory, it's always been tough to kind of schedule that. So it's been cool seeing some of the platforms that have been tackling that. And obviously, personally, I've been using a lot of these different things, and platforms also just connect with friends and like connect with other students for that sake as well.
Okay, thanks. Carolyn, any examples, peer learning, or things that we should keep in
mind?
mind?
This is an interesting question, because it's actually something I was just thinking about this week, how little I've had of that. And I think there's various reasons for it. But for example, doing collaborative projects is great. But one of the projects we are doing actually has bots tracking us and loads of graphics every time at the end of the discussion showing us who spoke and when. And this has actually managed to kind of kill off our desire to really share, because nobody wants to speak too much. We've also all been very English and very polite about, who speaks and when, so that we're all fair, because of course everyone's read the results. And as a result, we're not really sharing as much as we could, and we're definitely not learning as much as we could from each other. So it's actually not worked for me so far.
Wow, interesting, interesting point. Vivian, anything about peer learning?
I guess so far, I mean, from my experience, I guess I see that. I think I agree with Jason. So a lot of this peer learning might happen when we socialize. So how do we actually socialize online using Teams or even using, the platform? Because it also depends on how active people are, or how committed they are to the platform. So I guess personally for me, the peer learning might happen when we share the assignment, because the online section is too short to go into a very detailed discussion, and we don't have a lot of group work. I think the other way is I actually set up a few Zoom call with some of my course mates. So I think that's for me a lot of personal learning from them, because I get to know them, but it takes a lot of initiative on myself to actually set up the call, to do the call, rather than relying on the system itself to work.
Thank you. Okay. And then it was Arno, I think.
Yeah, well, I feel in terms of peer learning, yeah, I feel that it's very nice that the fact that we can chat during the Zoom meeting, just to ask quick questions to each other. I even did that during class sometimes, the face-to-face class, and then yeah, you weren't really allowed to do that, because then you're talking to each other and you had to shut up and listen, let's say. But yeah, when going online, it makes that these moments a lot easier, let's say. So I think, yeah, of course there are bad things about going online, but some things are also really good. And I think, for example, you have one thing which is chatting, you have another thing which is reacting with emojis, you have the voting, but I think it could be exploited way more and in more elaborating on such things, also to enhance that two-way communication. I think, yeah, that EdTech provides a lot of opportunities that you are not really allowed to do when you're in a real life face-to-face class.
Okay, thanks. The next question I had to do with challenges that you may be facing. And I know we had the list of the top 10, and to me it was more that I think was something I was taking from that, was that it was more in terms of some factors to consider or issues to consider. But I was wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing, and again, just in terms of what level of challenge you want to share, but something that, for example, during this coronavirus, as being a student, so anything in mind, and it doesn't have to be for you, but maybe some things you've been hearing from other people who've been students. So anything you wouldn't mind just sharing about the challenges of being a student during coronavirus era. And maybe we'll mix it up. So I'll ask Carolyn.
Sure. So yeah, there's been quite a few challenges, and I think what the two who presented at the beginning today were talking about, a lot of that is in there. Communication being a huge one, in fact, almost one of the biggest. Communication in the sense of many levels, such as where do I find stuff? How do I get to the link? Where is that file? Even things like, I have to choose a module. How on earth do I make a proper decision about that? I don't have enough information. Things like, oh, well, what I read for doing this course is different now that I'm on it. So I feel like I don't have the right kind of communication prior to being a student here. Even things like, like deadlines which change, schedules which change sometimes, which can be a bit disruptive when you've made plans. I mean, lots of us are actually working almost full time outside of this, so we don't have endless time to keep looking for things. And in fact, more than anything, it greatly increases the stress levels. I found myself swearing at Moodle several times because I really just didn't know where to go to get something. And another thing, just to not take up too much time, is instructions. I think writing one version of instructions in a page somewhere is no longer sufficient, because if you don't have the tutor in front of you in a weekly session that you can talk to about such things, where do you go? Maybe you try and talk to another student, but maybe they don't understand it either. So I really think something major has to be done on how instructions and assignments are going to be presented, and visuals as well within that. So yeah.
Interesting. Thanks. Vivian.
I guess maybe just not me. I think also from what I've heard. So I guess one of the challenges is how do we feel a sense of community, because our program is mostly online and we haven't actually met each other face to face. How do we have that kind of bonding to be able to support each other, because there's so much happening, so much information, and so much happening with our assignment or even the course. How do we create that community. I think that that's something that we're still figuring out. But I guess once we're able to build a community, I think it sort of changes our entire journey of studying together, also the peer learning.
Thanks. Jason?
Yeah, adding on to what Vivian said, I mean, I like that point a lot, right? Because I think that ties into not only building a community, but also building a connection. And when you're more connected with your peers, especially if you're doing some kind of group project, you guys work in harmony, you work in synergy, as opposed to just being one person who's doing a fixated task and you're just staring at your computer, doing your part, and then you're handing that in. That's not learning. Learning is working with other individuals, is making sure that you are using each other's skills, whatever it is. So that connection is really important. And yeah, again, that connection is what enables the real learning process to be triggered, I guess.
Okay, thanks. Arno?
Well, I feel for myself, especially during these times, that there is less connection between students in comparison to the time before COVID, when it was face-to-face. And what I experienced from it is that after class, or even during class, or when just seeing your fellow colleagues or students, there is much more in real life, so not online, but there is much more communication in terms of where you're at when studying classes, just to compare results, to compare other people, to keep track of where people are at studying, especially when communication is really in one way, just to have those comparisons. And when going online, yeah, you feel, I felt more alone in terms of that, and I didn't really know where the others were at, just to only have a comparison, like, am I doing well, or should I speed up some things? There is communication, don't get me wrong, but it was not the amount of communication as it was before. But again, that could be another challenge for educational technology, just to have some sort of communication platform, just to keep track of things, some sort of tracking platform. I don't know if it maybe exists.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry, can I add one more thing? Is that
Yeah.
okay? Yeah, so well, actually two very quick things. Another problem that came up was work overload. Just because it's online, it seems that, teachers just send so much stuff. And in fact, students don't have time to do it all. And then the stress builds. And also they want to have time to absorb stuff and digest it. And they're feeling at the moment that that's becoming increasingly difficult, especially on some courses. And also this fact of not having enough feedback from tutors is really not helping people's sense of direction and feeling lost. So that's a really big one, that one as well.
Yeah, thank you, Carolyn. Yeah, definitely those resonate with things we as instructors often hear. Similar to then what I've got. Oh, sorry, Vivian, please.
Yeah, can I just add one more point? So I guess I think also the teaching approaches, because I think adult learners, especially with Zoom, the section is pretty short. So I guess there has to be a way which it's more interactive, which allow a lot of peer learning to happen. So I guess that will be something that we find quite challenging when we're doing the course online.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Can I just add something?
Don't be sorry. Add.
Well, in terms of what Caroline said, in terms of workload, and students don't have time, because I experienced something, something nice actually last week, because my brother, he's in his second year, so he's doing the same education as I did before. And yeah, now he only has online classes he has the same classes which I had, but yeah, now he has to do them online. And he was following a recorded session because he has lots of recorded sessions now as well. It was last week, he was following a recorded session of 1 hour and a half. I was asking him, how are you doing? And he said to me that, yeah, I'm following a 1 hour and a half recorded session, but to fully understand everything that the professor said, he needed longer than 1 hour and a half. So he had to repeat a lot of things he said. And I answered him that yeah, I said to him, well, actually, you're quite lucky because the prof, yeah, most of the time professors go really fast. So that's what I experienced. And when I had to follow that course, that lecture, yeah, first of all, I didn't have a recorded session, so I couldn't just listen again to what the person said earlier. I also had notes, but most of the time they were not, yeah, really complete because, yeah, it was at a high pace. So it took me way longer than him just in order to fully understand everything the professor said, because then I had to search on the internet, for example, if my notes were not correct. But yeah, then you have internet searching, and is that very efficient? Yeah, sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. So I said to him that he was actually quite lucky because he had the recorded session in order, yeah, just to save time and reduce his workload and study load. So that was an interesting experience.
Okay, thanks, Arno. Yeah, that certainly makes me think, and something that you individually might want to check in. A number of universities, for example, now have invested heavily in things like lecture capture. And so there's some very interesting information when you look at the analytics about how students access video recordings and the practices they have when they're watching. So how often do they stop? Do they go back and forth? And are there certain parts that they view multiple times? So it's actually very interesting to see how students are interacting with those kind of resources. So I don't know, very interesting comment. The next question I wanted to ask then was, of course, then connected to the challenges. Are there any things that you're finding, and again, you can be as personal as you like, or maybe talk about other things you're hearing from other people, any habits or things that you're doing to try to address some of those challenges? So are you finding, for example, have you been changing the way you study to try to deal with some of these challenges during the coronavirus time? Anything to come to mind? So Jason.
I mean, definitely, yeah. Like, there's a myriad of things I think to say on that regard. I think one thing that is interesting is, like, you know how in the past, obviously with students, like they would do study groups. What's interesting is that, like, now I personally, and I know other students are just doing the same thing but online, virtually, and it still has the same benefits, the still effects. So that's one interesting thing. I'd also say another thing is that, like, for example, I'm always someone that uses technology to be able to really organize all the things I learn, all the points and stuff. And the fact that we're all online, the fact that we're all digital, I can a lot more easily go to this technology to be able to easily communicate concepts, ideas to other people, which is not something that I would be doing in the classroom, right? Like if you're in person. So for example, I use this thing called Notion that I don't know, I'm sure many of you know about, and just being able to like get that across to use a lot of notes and get those across to classmates and stuff has been super effective in being able to use these kind of EdTech softwares.
Okay, thanks, Jason. Jason, do you mind putting that link in the chat? Because there may be some people who aren't familiar with that. And actually, to everyone on the call here now, are there any tools that you, for example, are using? Feel free to throw things in the chat as I'm asking the panelists too, if little hints of things that you might find have been helpful. Carolyn, any things that you found that have been helping to address some of these challenges?
It's a good question. I hadn't really thought about it, to be honest. I suppose the thing is I'm a super independent learner and I have been for years. So whether I have peer sessions or not, I'm always learning and working because I just adore learning. So I think if I was going to make any changes, it would be to do with making more of a community with fellow students, like finding a way of getting that working in a better way. But apart from that, no, sorry, I don't have anything else.
No, it's okay. Thank you. Oh boy, who am I forgetting? Arno.
Well, I honestly didn't really thought about it either. A big difference is that previous years, lots of times I just write things down with pen and paper. That I'm not doing anymore. I'm just not writing things down with a pen anymore. And honestly, for example, Zoom, I didn't even use it before. So I find it already an accomplishment for me just on using Zoom, because I didn't need it. So, but for other, I'm not really using specific technology to deal with problems. I'm using Microsoft Teams now, for example, because I never used it before, and I find it actually quite handy to use. but I don't have any more tools I'm using.
Okay, thanks. Vivian?
I guess it's very similar to Carolyn. I am always very independent in terms of learning, but I guess I am now more aware of, how I can learn even better from my peers, because I think some of my classmates, they've been talking about, studying together or even talking about the assignment together. So I guess that's something that we're just starting to form the group and see, how we can discuss and look at certain topics. I think the other way that I am trying to deal with certain challenges or change my behavior learning is I'm using a lot more tools to collaborate with others. And it seems to be more effective and interesting because I'm using a combination of visuals and paper, pens, and text. So I guess that's also inspiration when I work with the teams or as a group as well.
Okay, thanks. Really interesting advice. I'm also interested in advice to help me deal with sitting in a chair for I don't know how many hours a day in front of the screen, and what kind of like jumping jacks I should do, or whether there should be like just a little thing. I want to see which of you can create a walking online Zoom class the first time ever, and tell me if you can manage it. So everyone here, we all grab our phones and we all go for a walk, and we're all on a Zoom call while we're walking. That's my personal challenge to everyone, to see if it's possible. I haven't tried it out yet, but all my Finnish students, you got to watch out. I'm going to try it soon.
I got a suggestion for you there.
Oh, okay.
You can do weightlifting during your
Oh
class.
my gosh, yeah, that's okay. Yeah, those kind of things. Oh, somebody's saying skydiving. Yeah, a Zoom call while skydiving. That sounds pretty good. Okay, and then one of the other questions, and again, feel free if there's specific questions that you'd like to address to the panel. I'd be happy to see those in the chat. As you can see, kind of going from the challenges, how you've been doing. So now me looking further into the future. Any thoughts in terms of some of these the way you've been studying? Can you see has been going through this process? Is it changing the way you see that you might do education in the future? So, for example, Caroline, I think you were mentioning you're always you're really interested in learning. So I assume you and others here on the call, you've been taking many different kinds of trainings in the past. Has this experience so far changed in terms of maybe what you might be looking for in the future?
I think it's again back to the visual side. I mean, also for me, for the way I'm going to do presentations in the future, the way I'm going to, even because for myself, I also work as a teacher online actually at the same time. So it's kind of interesting being on both sides and just realizing that even though the visual part is absolutely not what we think about when we're at university face to face, right? The professors will kind of wear whatever, some of them mumble when they speak. But the problem is that when this goes online, that actually becomes a problem, right? So the way you even present your videos, even if they're pre-recorded, I mean, some of the times I'm looking at videos and I'm like, oh my gosh, I mean, I'm really good at learning, but this is well boring. And it's difficult because the subject's great, but we're used to something else now. There's a million YouTube videos out there with people who've spent a lot of time making sure it looks visually attractive. And I'm not saying that teachers have to do this. I know, people spend years doing research and doctorates, and that's really not what the main focus is. But unfortunately, I think, especially with the younger generation who are completely used to visuals, this is going to have to become something that gets integrated into university systems, because also it can be very easy to remember things if they're visually presented in a nice way. So that, for me, I think for me producing them and me expecting and looking for that is something I hadn't realized how important that would be until we've spent all these months since March online. So yeah, that would be one of my biggest takeaways today.
Great point. Yeah, and certainly from my experience over the last 10 years, having to be in front of a camera and learning how to do things, and that's why I made my hair look the way it is today. So thank you, Arno.
Well, I think it's interesting what you said, Caroline, about YouTube, because there are lots of professors that say like, oh, you want to watch that, go see that YouTube clip, but well, I feel, and I sometimes experienced that in my previous years at university. For example, if I had to know more about a certain instrument or a lab instrument for biochemistry or normal, classic chemistry or so. Professors said, because they don't have that at university, for example. Oh, watch this YouTube video, then you will understand how it works. But I think that in the future you could do way more, and it can actually evolve in the sense that I would really like to see more some sort of simulations like augmented learning. And I think if you use that, I think you can understand way more how the device actually works, because you can change the parameters yourself. It's not the same as the real device, but it's a way step ahead instead of a YouTube, just a YouTube video. So I think augmented learning, virtual reality, I felt at first it was something only for the gaming industry, because I came into contact with virtual reality and augmented reality through video gaming. And later on, I discovered that it's also, and it can be used just to learn things, to handle instruments. So I think if that's ever, I really hope it's ever gonna be implemented into education, that would be really nice.
Thanks, Arno. Vivian?
So I guess for me, with the online learning, I think I see a lot of possibilities for learning to happen within a class, like co-creation, collaboration, because whether we use a tag or not, it's not really the most important thing, because when it comes to teaching and learning, it goes down to, how do we engage the learners? How do we make the experience really memorable and make achieve the learning goal? So I see that the possibility of like co-creation, collaboration, but I think the teaching faculty, they might have to use a mix of tools to make this happen. And there are a lot of tools, and it's quite challenging for faculty to be quite hands-on with all these tools in such a short time. But I guess in future, it will be a lot easier.
Thanks. Okay, Jason?
Remind me of the question real quick, just
So
to be clear.
things that you might keep in mind if you're looking at training in the future. So choices, something that might impact the kind of choices that you might make in the future for doing studies later.
Yeah, sure. I guess the way I see it is like this shift that we've seen now in obviously online education and stuff. What interests me around it is the fact that we're now pushing higher education is on the edge. Not only higher education, but also high schools, in the sense that they have to be able to figure out, especially obviously during this pandemic, how can we start to take advantage of the fact that this world is now realizing that we can shift into online learning as a means of really being able to scale learning like globally. So I think, so I don't know exactly, I don't really have ideas on how you make the learning better, but I definitely realize that the scalability of online learning and the potential it has behind it is just something that's super interesting. And I think it's also just kind of worth bringing in there as a small comment.
Thanks. Okay, another.
Sorry, can I add two
Carolyn.
more? Do you
Yeah,
mind?
please
Sorry,
do.
yeah, it's just
it
takes time to get the ideas together for a while. So another thing I'll be looking for is personalization, right? This is something I hear since I began my EdTech course, and I don't actually have any on my EdTech course. So it's kind of this question of, great, I'm reading about all this cool tech and pedagogy, and I don't feel I'm experiencing it myself on the course I'm doing. So that's definitely something I would want to change in the future. And the second thing then is about this idea of new interactions. I don't think we can expect to continue to interact in the way that we did in a face-to-face classroom online. And I would like to see more creativity in that aspect as well, and on a teacher side and a student side, because I believe the responsibilities and the roles need to change in order to get a maximum out of it. So I think there needs to be like experimentation in that area to discover, where can this go, and how can we make, how can we really make a great experience, like Arno was saying, this idea of an experience, which is what university is normally, and it's not so much an experience in the same way online at the moment.
Okay, thanks. And that kind of leads into one of my final questions. With regards to the coronavirus time right now, we often hear people saying, there's vaccines coming, we're potentially going to be able to go back to a lot of the way we used to do things. And then there's other people who are saying we're never going back to the way things used to be. Carolyn, you mentioned that the point in terms of something that you'd like to see happening, let's say once, a year from now. But I guess the question I want to ask you all is there something that you don't want us to go back to? Something in the old, let's say the older way of teaching and learning that you were experiencing before that you would be more than happy not to have to do anymore? Any thoughts with that, Vivian? That may be a challenging one to kind of imagine, but it's sort of prediction time.
Okay, I'm thinking, it's because of virus. A lot of things, the teaching happen online, so it has opened up the opportunities for studying or learning, like Jason just mentioned, that can scale globally. So I hope in future, a lot of the programs at universities or different institutions, they can be open to, accessible to all kinds of learners. So I see that as a possibility with online learning. So
okay.
it makes it even more accessible to a lot of students.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Arno, are we going back to normal or something you don't want to see?
Well, I think, when I talked about the one-way communication, that's something I don't want to see anymore, but I'm afraid it still happens a lot. But I would say definitely keep Zoom calls. Maybe, because we talked earlier about sending emails and generations that some sort of change and evolve towards their way of communicating. Who knows, maybe Zoom replaces email, or does software exist? Because I was thinking about that, because when going online, sometimes I'm a bit uncertain to ask quick questions to other people. So how are you going to do it? Are you going to send an email? Are you going to message them? It may seem irrelevant to the other person. The other person has to type the explanation. So what about software in which you can just have some sort of speech recognition technology, just to have some sort of conversation if you're not comfortable with seeing each other? I mean, that would be nice, I think.
Okay, cool. Jason, are we going back to normal or anything you don't want to see?
So are we going back to normal? The reality is probably we will go back to normal, but do I think we should go back to normal? No. I think that actually what we should do is we should maintain and keep some kind of hybrid system. So if you look at, for example, IU University, for example, has this system called liquid learning, right? Where you can have the option of, someone can be in class, but someone can also be not in class physically there, but watching, and also be in a certain class in a certain way. But I think the importance of this is it really comes down to the fact that it comes down to accessibility. I think that if we can support and continue to support this hybrid system, we'll be able to have colleges that are going to be able to bring on more learners, bring on more students, and not only do that, but also essentially, and I'm hoping maybe reduce prices, make it more accessible to people, for example, that are not going to be able to go and live, for example, if a student at IE, right, like I am, you're not going to have the possibility to go and live in Madrid, but you'll have to live in somewhere else, and maybe you'll do some kind of part-time job. I think hybrid learning brings about massive opportunities because it can provide so much more flexibility, and that itself can be an opportunity in itself. So yeah, that's my take on it. I mean, hybrid systems, I think, are really the way to go.
Thanks. Caroline?
Yeah, I would agree with Jason. I think blended learning, I would consider that to be really optimal, as long as, of course, you're living in the same place and you can afford to do that. I guess there's so much I love about online that, I love the fact you have all these ebooks and the e-journals and you can just get so much information in between the classes. I love all the links pages that you can get from teachers where you can find all this information and where you can learn whenever you feel like it and that you're not stuck to a timetable of learning. I also like recorded lectures, although I miss the interaction of asking questions. So I think what I don't like, though, is all the travel that you have to do to get somewhere. I don't like the wasted kind of logistics time. I don't like having to carry lots of library books, so I definitely don't miss that part. But what I'm wondering about is going forward I don't see why lectures couldn't continue live on Zoom, as long as there was lots of Q&A time as well. And in that case, I think actually being present would be much better used by perhaps working on projects or doing some kind of collaboration, or being involved in a situation where you really need expert advice in order to help you get forward and to develop something. So I don't see why universities have to stay with this old lecture method for the face-to-face part. And I think maybe that is the part that should be rethought. Like, what can we do that's even more beneficial in a two-way direction for learning with that precious time when students and teacher are in the classroom?
Thank you. Really impressive ideas and comments. I do want to keep an eye on the time. Is there anyone in the panel? Do you have any other, let's say, final, what I often like to do is sort of a final word. So if you were to share any advice or thoughts to the group here, or any of your other peers or students who may be coming behind you, any final words that you'd like to share? So I'll just randomly go. Jason, final words.
I guess my final words would be like, if we look at what's happened in this pandemic, and not only within learning, what we've seen essentially is a shift towards what the future could look like. And I think that's a positive lining, right, from this whole like scenario, because we're seeing what learning could be like in the future. And though right now it's not optimal, we know that, you know, over time it'll become an optimal system. And we know that if it becomes optimal, it'll also become a lot more impactful. Again, coming back to scalability and thinking about just how many more people we could reach, and also how much more accessible and flexible we're making it. So yeah, I think just that fact that, you know, we're seeing what the future could look like, and we've got to think about should we keep on, you know, thinking about this future, or how can we reconstruct it in an even better and more optimal way?
Thanks. Arno?
Well, my final words would be, I really hope that university embraces technology even more, because I still have the feeling that it's not integrated enough into university. So using, for example, recorded sessions, if it's possible, virtual labs, some sort of design tools, some maybe other communication platforms, tools to effectively summarize or structure content, tools about managing forums, what we were talked about before the noon. I mean, using Miro, Bednet, Kahoot, Duolingo. I mean, all those things exist, but and a lot is in development. But I think it's not just integrated. And professors, I feel they don't use it. Why? Are they some sort of, I don't know, maybe they are uncertain to use it. That could be. Then the training, some sort of professor training might be needed. But I think so, yeah, for universities, implement it, because I think it's really more interesting for students. And I hope at some point that students would say, like, I love going to school, because that's what really matters, I think.
Thanks, Arno. Vivian?
I guess for me, I guess university might have to change even much quicker in terms of, you know, how they deal with all these changes, you know, using technology and internet. And there has to be a more consistent, like at the strategic level of, you know, how changes will happen, because it seems like they're not really catching up as quickly as the world that we're moving into, like online learning or hybrid learning. So there's still this kind of, you know, gap in between. And I think there has to be a lot more training for the teaching faculty, because they're so busy, you know, dealing with all these changes, but they don't really have time to catch up on tools, on teaching approaches using Zoom or even other tools.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Caroline?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I have a few things. I do think that the emotional life of students will need to come in here at some point too. At the minute, it does seem to be a bit the thing that we just put away to the counselors. But I think if there's going to be as well a larger majority of people studying online, and that's going to have to at some point be addressed and dealt with, not only just for dropout rates, but also just to help people become happy young adults who are capable of learning and feel empowered. I mean, that's essentially what education's about. And I think if we're not dealing with that side of it, we're only doing half the job, really. Yeah, I also agree there needs to be more clarity and organization in general, so that things are easy and no one's losing any time. Again, we spoke about personalization. I think we definitely need to see much more of that, because I really don't feel I have any of that right now. Again, the idea, like Arno said, of cutting edge technology, we're reading about it, but we're not actually using it. So, you know, that's too much of a gap. Someone also mentioned at one point about different assessment types. We've still got the old system of essays. So what about some of these collaborative projects? I mean, I guess it depends on the university, but maybe they instead could have some points. And another point that came up is pay. Like, why should you pay the same for course online as you would face-to-face? And this is something that is actually irritating for people, but it's not something that's been addressed. I mean, okay, in England, of course, it's more of a problem than Finland, where education's free, of course. And I suppose one last point would be that we have lots of research on interactions. We've got lots of research on types of technology, but I really think there needs to be more done as to making sure that the technology we're using or the interactions we're trying to use are worked to their maximum. I feel a bit like sometimes things like peer learning, it's only successful in certain conditions. If people don't really know what they're talking about because the subject's too new, it's actually not helpful and it's not valued. So it's a waste of time for students. They want expert input. So I think there needs to be real proper consideration of why are they using this interaction pattern and, you know, what could be perhaps done better.
Great. Well, again, thank you so much for all the comments, and it's been an absolute pleasure to get to know those of you who I haven't met before. And I'm again, Milena, I'm trying to keep us to the time. So from my side, thank you very much, and I'll wrap up my role here, and I'll pass it over to Milena.
Thank you very much, Blair, and thank you to our panelists. I wish we could continue longer because I wanted to know more, and I find it very refreshing, this way of sharing and finding out about things that normally you don't get to learn during conferences or this sort of meetings. So thank you so much for sharing and for agreeing to be representatives of your universities during this panel. And well done, Blair, as usually. Thank you so much.